Now, I'm very excited about who I have here on the Posted Up podcast. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Mr. Silver, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No, well, Luke, I'll say this. This probably won't impress you, but this attire I have on is usually, it's a lot better than what I usually have. It's posted up, so I'm usually relaxed, interviewing the players, but I said I at least got to put a collar shirt on for
nice.
the commissioner. Because I knew you were coming.
I don't know
like
if
that.
they can see that the purple is picked up in the stripe on
It
your
is.
pants.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, all right.
I'm saying that's what. Hey, man,
and the shoes and the color, the match goes straight through.
Well, the shoes not so much. I'm glad the camera didn't catch that. But anyway, I appreciate you for coming on. I knew you were going to be coming over here looking dapper, so I at least put a collar shirt on for you.
You look great.
Thank you. So what is your, I guess, when you found out that it was going to be Golden State Toronto, what's the first thing that came to your mind about this upcoming series?
One, that first time for the Raptors in the finals. I thought that was particularly exciting. I was here at the league office when we expanded to Canada, originally to Vancouver and Toronto in 1994, 1995. And so to see a team that sort of was birthed sort of during my time here, then evolve, and then through really strong management over the last several years, Tim Lewicki coming in, and then Masai Ujiri, Larry Tannenbaum, of course, is the owner of the team, together with Bell and Rogers in Canada. You know, to see great management come together. Masai went for it, obviously, in getting Kawhi to Toronto, and see success there. I'm thrilled for the league office, and frankly, for Golden State, overcame a lot of adversary. You know, throughout the season, you know, most recently KD being down and to still be in the finals, that's really exciting as well.
And I know ratings, you know, you talked about ratings, so, you know, a week ago or however long it was, but how successful was that Golden State-Cleveland rivalry? Like, how big was that for the league?
I mean, it was huge for the league. I think, though, that anytime you have, you know, top players in the league, regardless of markets coming together, when you have Steph, when you have Clay, when you have Draymond, then adding Kevin Durant, when you have LeBron with a collection of players. I think what's really interesting in terms of what's happening these days in the league, it's a lot less market specific. I mean, I hear, oh, does the league not want Toronto or not want Milwaukee or not want this market or that market? I mean, my response is, in this day and age, it really doesn't matter in a day and age of social media. You know, just think about this format right now, where, you know, the amount of people you reach through I don't know, a video podcast, whatever the right terminology is. But so I think for us, it's just about the best competition. And I think when, after a long regular season, hard-fought playoffs, two teams come together after really exciting competition this year. I mean, particularly this year, I think we had some incredible matchups. I'm thrilled.
Well, let's talk about one of the matchups. Drake. Has Drake gone too far, Adam Silver? Has he gone too far with the antics, with the massage? What's your take? I wanted to ask you that. What's your take on him and his interactions over there?
You know, one, we appreciate how big a fan he is, and I know the Raptors do. I mean, I think he has the official designation ambassador, and it's not just now to Raptors and Toronto, but I think as a Canadians for all of Canada right now, and he's a global star. So hey, it's a huge deal that he's so engaged with the team and loves the NBA so much. Obviously, there's some lines that even ambassadors shouldn't cross, and I think one, you know, in the heat of the moment, I think to give the coach a massage, I think Nick Nurse said after the fact, I didn't even know, I mean, just how much he's in the moment. I think he didn't even realize that Drake had done that. I think Drake understands that, you know, as excited as he is and as appreciative we are of his support, that there's got to be lines drawn, and obviously you don't want to end up touching a coach because the coach may not realize what's going on in the middle of the action. And I think, you know, there's a line too in terms of sitting right on the floor in terms of engagement, whether it's with the referees and players on other teams. I mean, you know, and it's hard to calibrate sometimes exactly where that line is, and I think he has a better understanding now of where that line is. You know, and his manager Future, who sits with him too. I mean, you know, we've all talked, all of us together, and I think that
since then.
Since then, I mean, there's been conversations that have taken place, but I mean, it's more just, all right, let's just find where that right line is. But Drake's great. You know, he hosted our award show 2 years ago. He's a huge fan. And I think what people know is that Raptors are his team, but he's fans of players throughout the league and knows a lot of guys.
Yeah, so, he has a relationship with a lot of top stars in the league. Another thing you touched on about a week or so ago was about the impact of LeBron James being over there in Los Angeles, and how, I guess, ratings are not what we're used to seeing because he's on the West Coast with the...
Right. What I said was it clearly had an impact in the regular season. What a lot of people may not be aware of is that although it's a very big country, the Eastern time zone actually has 50% of all television households in the country. And the Pacific time zone, obviously where LA is, where San Francisco is, only has 13% of viewers in the country. So when LeBron makes that move from a time zone that has 50% to 13%, and he's one of the most popular players in the league, it's invariably going to have an impact on ratings. And when the Lakers, who are a hugely popular team, together with LeBron, don't make the playoffs, that has an impact too. But that's something that's cyclical. I mean, I was really pointing out more, I wasn't so much bemoaning it as just saying that's the math, you know, and that when our games that start in East at 10:30 at night, like there's a lot of people, you can tell directly again from the Nielsen data that roughly 11:15, 11:30, a large group of television households just turn off the sets because they need to go to bed for work the next day. And so I think one of the things we're looking at for next season is maybe right now we play at 8 and 10:30, for example, in the East we play at 8 and 10:30. Should we play at 7 and 9:30 possibly, just so for those exciting West Coast games we can hold the fans in the East a little bit longer? But I get it, it's a trade-off because people watching this in the West are saying, well, you know, I'm still at work when you'd be starting the early game. So at the end of the day, we got to pay attention where the audience is, and we play when we do to reach the largest number of people. I mean, just for example, in the finals, we play at 9 o'clock Eastern. Now that's 6 o'clock Pacific. That's not the most convenient for some people, but I think everyone recognizes that if we're a national sport and actually a global sport, we got to play at a time first and foremost for fans in the United States where the most people can watch, and that's roughly 9 p.m. Eastern.
Since LeBron is the exception, could you look at only just implementing that new time zone on the Lakers?
That we could have a special Lakers time zone. I mean, that's really interesting.
Well, Lakers are they're the talk of, they're talking to him.
It seems like they have their own own channel. It's called ESPN. I've been watching for the last few days. I mean, I have it on in my office, and it's like it's round the clock. So we'll consider it.
I was about to ask you. I'm glad we brought up the Lakers. Great segue, Adam. They're all in the headlines, and you mentioned one of the companies that's really pushing that. But is it really an issue over there? I know sometimes you do step into situations. Have you had to do that, and do you see yourself?
I have not stepped into that situation. Of course, I've talked to Magic. I've talked to Jeannie. I mean, I know them well. We've all known each other for. I've been with the league 27 years, so I've known Jeannie and Magic since I got to the league. So sure, we talk, but it's not a function of stepping in right now. I'd say on Jeannie Buss's behalf, I mean, she's been part of a family that is most successful, dynasty probably in modern sports history when you think of over the course of the time that her family has owned the team, the number of championships they've won, the number of finals she's won, and she worked hand in hand with her father Jerry Buss. I mean, she learned sort of the business sort of a teenager on up. So they'll figure it out. I mean, at the end of the day, they still have one of the very best players of all time, one of the very best players in the league, in LeBron James. I'd say that, they had a difficult season last year, and I think there's a lot of piling on. I mean, there are a lot of Laker fans out there, and as a result, there's a lot of Laker haters out there too. And there's also some very competitive teams that want to point out when they see issues with a team, they're whispering to their guy or to a free agent, don't go there, you should go here because we're better managed or whatever else. At the end of the day, I have tremendous confidence in Jeannie. I mean, she knows this league inside and out. I mean, honestly, she's NBA royalty. And sure, when you're not winning, people are going to take shots at you, but they'll get it back together.
You're confident about that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, so one of the things I've talked to, I talked to a bunch of players, letting them know that you're going to be on the pod next. So this was one question they wanted me to ask. I'm not going to name the players. And so the player-fan dynamic has been a hot topic this season. The Russell Westbrook situation, DeMarcus Cousins, a couple others. They wanted to ask if a fan says like a racist remark or something like that, and then the camera only catches the player responding back saying something like back to a fan. They feel like they're getting treated not treated fairly because the camera catches them. They're in the heat of the moment, heat of battle, and then the fan says that and they react and they feel like they get fined or criticized. Is there a balance? What do you say to the players deal with that type of situation?
No, it's a fair question. First, I really mean this, I would tell that player to talk to Michelle Roberts and the Players Association, because we're working very closely on these fan issues. I mean, I'm not going to say the number publicly, but just in the playoffs so far this year, it's, lots of fans have been removed from the arena for using inappropriate language. And for us, of course, we depend on fans. You depend on fans, I depend on fans to drive this business. And there's probably something that generally you could call heckling. I don't know, whatever the right term of art these days, where it's acceptable. You pay your money, you yell at the refs, you yell at a player, but it doesn't even approach something that you and I would consider hate speech. But then there's that language that crosses the line. And I'd say that line has moved over my time in the league. When I got to the league in the early 90s, people would yell out stuff, misogynistic, anti, all kinds of groups, and they would just do it. And nobody really stepped in and prevented them from doing that. I think as societal norms have changed over the years, we've really cracked down in a huge way, to the point now where even when a player, let's say a player yells something out, first of all, we can't really work in a system where a player, we can say it's justified because somebody called you something. But, I would say we take that into account, though. If a player somehow, if somebody else instigated it, that's a factor. But there are so many cameras in our arenas in this day and age that if a player says to us, and this is where the Players Association really weighs in, because they're part of our investigations, if a player says, you see me on camera, but there was somebody yelling at something at me, we can almost always pick that up on one of the in-arena cameras. There are so many cameras, not just the 14 or so cameras that are there televising the game, but virtually every arena these days has high-definition cameras pointed at the seats. So in case there's an incident, it's sort of like closed circuit in a lot of businesses. They can then look back at those cameras and say, aha, there we are, section 112, row 7, seat G, there was a problem there. So we have the ability to investigate when there is an indication that something's happened. And on top of that, I just add, this day and age, on top of all that camera equipment, virtually every fan has the equivalent of a high-definition camera, called a smartphone.
That's true.
And so we found when there are incidents, if you go to YouTube or even people sending things to the league office, there's an amazing amount of video out there that's also capturing what's going on. So I'd say in a very positive way, one, that allows us, to the extent there is fan behavior that we need to deal with, there's a lot greater likelihood we're going to pick it up. But number two, I think it really acts as a disincentive, as a preventative of people potentially doing things like that. Because I think most fans, especially in the lower bowl, have that awareness that they're very likely to be caught on camera. And if they were to do something to cross a line, that they're not only going to be expelled from the arena, but likely be banned from the arena for a season, sometimes for life. So I guess my response to the player asking that question is, we're in this together. We are really cracking down on it. We know in terms of the number of incidents we've had, the numbers are way down. And I think, again, because partly what I commend Donovan Mitchell, sort of what sort of he brought attention to the issue after, obviously a visiting team, and Russell Westbrook had guys yelled something at him there. But I think the team came together. The community member, Gail Miller, the owner of the team, made a statement to the entire community. So I think in a really positive way, there's a lot more sensitivity than there was historically to these kinds of issues.
On another issue, the supermax, that I've heard you speak about, maybe it needs to be a bigger incentive, maybe to increase the amount that they can make if these star players stay with their team, if they're qualified for supermax. But on the other note, which affects us in the media, is that our ballots, our voting ballots obviously decide on who qualifies for that supermax. And it makes us, I know, obviously I've probably seen the complaint somewhere, but it makes our job a little bit tougher, puts us in an easy position because I feel like we're deciding on who gets paid and who doesn't. Is there any way of changing that, or what do you see? Do you see it as a problem?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's absolutely a way of changing it, and it would be in the next collective bargaining agreement. I think you can sort of imagine how we got to the media making that decision. Us, first of all, saying we need a designation as to who shall be eligible to get a supermax. And one of the criteria was all NBA. And then we have, the selectors, of course, are the media for all NBA, but it's 100 people who are voting. And I think the sense was, in a group of 100, that you're generally going to reach the right group. May not be perfect, but as opposed to a panel of GMs or people at the league office. So I think it was it seemed to be the best alternative at the time. When we sit down for collective bargaining, there's no doubt we'll revisit that. And I'm on both sides of a lot of these issues. I mean, to your first question about the supermax, on one hand, you wanted to create an incentive, for players to stay in their market. And I've been very clear about that in terms of free agency. We built a system to create incentives for guys to stay. They have every right to leave when they become free agents, but we've always felt as a league a certain amount of continuity was good. And in order to encourage that continuity, you can pay that guy more and give him a longer contract. As we know, there's well-known examples where players have said, that's not enough for me. Now, the first question is, if it were even more money, would that somehow, obviously it would create an even greater incentive, would that make a difference? But at the same time, the other side of the balance is, at the end of the day, we have what I call a sort of a macro hard cap. 50% of the money goes to the players. So then the issue is, how is the money going to get distributed? And as the more money you give to the superstars, obviously the less money there's left over for the other players in the league. And not even, so putting even aside a fairness standpoint of how the money should be divided, if you and I were trying to construct a team, the more money that goes to one particular superstar, possibly two superstars, is the less money that can go to the other players on the team. So again, we're always trying to find the right balance. And this last iteration through the collective bargaining agreement was an attempt where the union came in and said, we think that we don't have the exact right balance, that the true superstars should get even a little bit greater share of the pie. And we're like, all right, how do you decide who are those true few superstars who deserve that money? We came up with this all-NBA formula, plus MVP, plus a few other designations, and this is where we are. So the good news is we have a great relationship with the Players Association. Great relationship meaning we don't always agree on things, but we certainly talk all the time. And as we move towards the end of this collective bargaining agreement, we'll have lots of data. We'll be able to lay it out and say, the money was sufficient to cause these guys to stay. These other guys left. Maybe they didn't leave for the money. Maybe they left for other reasons. And the goal, though, is to keep trying to come up with a system that allows the guys who are most deserving to make the most money, and at the same time create a 30-team league where every team, regardless of market, regardless of sort of the depth of the pockets of that owner, has an opportunity to compete. I think we're doing a lot better than we did in the old days, but still work to do.
What can be an alternative? You touched on, maybe it'd be an alternative and some way of coming up with who qualifies. What is it?
I just say, you could have all kinds of statistical designations. You could try to make it purely objective, based on those who are the top in the following categories. But I think the reaction was, well, that's unfair because the stats don't always tell the whole story. So there was a notion there. There are things like all-star designations and things like that. We stepped back and said, well, that's sometimes too much of a popularity contest. The media is in a better position. You can imagine there's lots of different ways to come up with it, and we came up with one system, but happy to revisit it.
With Anthony Davis and his situation played out, you spoke on that. You had a talk with New Orleans during that whole episode when things went down, and they kind of like shuttered him. Like they didn't play him the fourth quarter. How did you feel they handled all of that?
I thought they did the best they could in a difficult situation. We have rules on resting players, obviously, and we have rules on competition, in terms of what's appropriate for a rebuilding team. Obviously our system not only disfavors, but has rules against public trade demands. Yeah. And that wasn't helpful. There's no question about it. And ultimately, I don't think it was helpful for him either, even if he or his agent thought that was somehow in his best interest. I think that backfired to a certain degree. And I'd known Anthony for a long time. He's a great player, great guy. I just think that when you're going to be continuing to live and play in that market, it creates a really uncomfortable dynamic because he's saying, I don't want to be there. At the same time, the team is required to compete. And we tried to find the right balance there. So as opposed to them saying, well, he's just out for the rest of the season, which maybe was the desire of some people on the team, we said he needs to play. But, we cut a deal at the end of the day and said, all right, he's got to play this much. We're not going to manage his specific minutes. And it worked out as best as it could.
The in-game experience where now for NBA fans, you have the home. Some people have theater TVs in their household, and they got the apps. Everything. It's a great experience at home, and I think getting to the arenas, paying for parking, paying for the ticket, getting home late. There's a lot of things I think a lot of millennials face, and some people just enjoy the pure in-home experience of watching the game. Is there anything that can be done to enhance the attraction of still going to an NBA arena?
Yes, and there's a lot we've done, I think, over the last several years. I mean, I begin with the whole experience of going to the arena, the ease of getting into the arena. I mean, we still, unfortunately, in this day and age, you need security to get into buildings, so there's metal detectors and things, but we've shortened the lines, we've created more entrances to make that a little bit more convenient, we've modified bag policies and things like that, so, people can come from work and try to find the right balance that they're probably going to have something with them, maybe a bag, a briefcase or something like that, or a purse, and they can still get into the building with that. Once they're in the building, we've dramatically upgraded the quality of the seats. We've had upgrades, new arenas or upgraded arenas virtually in every city in the United States. We've dramatically upgraded the quality of the food in the arenas and the service. I mean, all again, to your point, you're competing against what otherwise may seem like a great home experience. Big screen television, high definition, you can sort of kick back, you go to sleep right at the end of the game. So we've done all those things. Then what I would call the in-game entertainment itself. I think teams have done a terrific job creating more entertaining experiences, whether that be a function of dancers they have at the games, mascots, halftime shows, music, quality of arena boards. I'm sure you've noticed as you go around from arena to arena, the arena board used to seemingly be this big, and now these things are like as long as the court, high definition, everything. Houston has a fantastic one, Indiana, others. Cleveland. So that's a great example of it as well. And then the other thing we focused is on the pace of the game. You noticed a year ago we reformatted the game. Our games are roughly 2 hours and 15 minutes now. And it's not just length, but pace of game. So we eliminated some of the breaks, and then we shortened some of the breaks, so that just to keep a little bit better pace. Because I noticed, I've been in a lot of playoff games, that sort of the long timeouts sometimes, that I think is, from an entertainment standpoint, is the hardest on the fans sometimes. They know we're going to commercials, obviously. They understand what's going on. But from the in-arena experience, you've got to really keep people engaged and interested in what's happening on the floor. So I'll say, take all those things together. Last thing I'll add is, it's interesting. People still crave a communal experience. I think as great as that television, as television high definition screens are, and your ability with a phone, a tablet, or whatever, watch it anywhere, people like to come together still. And it's interesting because things happen that are a little bit counterintuitive to me. We had meetings, I remember, with our teams 10 years ago, and people were in a bit of a panic because they were making the same points you are. My God, look what's happening with these high definition televisions. The price is coming way down. People are just going to stay home and watch. In fact, attendance has gone up over the last several years, to the point where our last 4 years have been the highest attendance in the history of the NBA. And I think the reason is, there's something about that communal experience, about people coming together, cheering together, jeering together, something about the energy that comes in the building, something about the live experience, which I think is really healthy. And so my bigger issue long term is actually media, because in terms of filling our arenas, we're roughly 94% or so full, and we can't really scale them anymore. There's not that many more seats to sell at the end of the day. So the real issue is for the 99% of our fans, vast majority of whom don't even live in the United States or Canada, how are we going to keep them engaged in a television or a screen experience? And that's where we're investing a lot in new technologies, studying virtual reality, augmented reality, all kinds of new enhancements in the games, just to keep people hooked. Because the other issue is, when you're at home and you're sitting on the couch, whether it's thousands of channels that are now available on your conventional TV through satellite or cable, or your phone, which has unlimited entertainment options, I'm sure you're the same. If there's a lull in the game, you almost subconsciously start looking down, whether you're tweeting or just looking at Instagram or doing other things. So we're competing against all those things at the same time. So that's something we're really focused on, just how we can ensure that we're continuing to keep our fans engaged every minute of the game.
So I want to transition to this, Mr. Silver.
Adam, please.
All right, Adam. When this is another question I felt like I have an obligation to ask, is that when you look at the executives in the league, and also coaches, that people of color is scarce, especially in a lot of markets. I know you've talked about just inclusion and making sure that we can take care of those areas, but is there anything that can be done to try to better make sure there's more people of color holding those positions of powers in front office or coaching positions?
Yes, I definitely think more can be done, and I like to think we're doing it. I mean, a few years ago, we hired a chief diversity and inclusion officer, Orr Stewart. He's doing a terrific job, not just in the league office, but working team by team, working with each ownership group. I think one is to help create a pipeline. I mean, for example, we have a basketball associates program here now because there was a sense from some of the players, former players, that they weren't being given the same opportunity to become GMs at teams. And in some cases, they felt because there had been a shift in the skill set, sort of a trend more towards analytics. And we said, well, let's create a training program in the league office. So that's something we're doing under Byron Spruell, president of league operations, who happens to be African American, but he created that program so that we can have that pipeline created in the league office. And then if you're looking for a coach, associate GM, you know there's a pool of candidates at the league office. I think also we can just draw more attention to the issue and ensure that it's something that our teams are very focused on. Part of it, we've learned the hard way, is that you really have to own the data, and that I think for some teams, it's got to be put right in front of them all the time. Say, here's your data, here's another team's data. This is your percent of African Americans. This is your percent of women. This is your percent of other minority groups who are working for the team. This is what your community looks like. This is what the country looks like. I think our fans expect that we're going to be diverse and inclusive organizations. So, but it's something that you have to work at. I think one thing I've learned, it's not enough just to say we want to be a diverse and inclusive organization, that you need programs in place, and you got to talk about it, frankly, every day, and you can make a difference. I think here at the league office, our deputy commissioner, Mark Tatum, of course, is African American. Our Sharif Abdul Rahim, president of the G League, is African American. Our head of basketball operations is African American. I hope that sets a good example, not just for our teams, but frankly for other industries. I mean, I will say at the end of the day, I look at the sports industry, and while we deserve our fair share of criticism for not doing more, I think we more than carry our weight against almost any other industry I see out there. But I don't want to be too defensive here, because I know we have to do more, and I think we are doing more.
No, and I think what the point is, like, the Rooney Rule, I'm not a big fan of that, just because I think it's just, especially in the NFL, they use that just to satisfy the critics and naysayers. What do you think about that, the Rooney?
All I'll say is I don't know enough at the end of the day about how effective it can be. When we've talked about that at the NBA, we didn't think a Rooney-type rule was for us. I think we're more focused on direct training and development of former players, coaches, in business jobs, people of color, through internship programs. We have a business associates program here as well, and I think we're making a lot of progress. But again, I mean, it requires everyone's attention all the time to make sure we don't slip back.
The marijuana has been legalized most places.
I don't know about most, but
a lot of places.
Yeah.
When is it? Is it going to be soon when you think the NBA is going to, allow for marijuana use?
A few issues there. One is, of course, it has to be collectively bargained. So it's something that we are talking to Michelle Roberts and the Players Association about what our policy should be. You might be surprised about this, but when I've talked to players about it, I think they have mixed feelings, some players. I think it's not as much about what guys do in the summer. If they want to smoke pot in the summer, whatever, it's legal in a lot of states, to your point, no issue. I do think there's a little bit of a concern about some of the pot smoking in season. Okay. I think it's a team sport, and I think part of the reason we have the rules in place, there was a time not so long ago when there were a group of players who felt, because ultimately the Players Association has to agree on any testing, that maybe there was too much pot being spoken in season.
Okay.
I mean, and look, my personal view
what
is,
were the effects?
Whether it's pot or alcohol, I think it's a sedative in certain ways. Okay. It's certainly not in a performance-enhancing drug, put it that way.
I think I'm thinking right with that.
Yeah. So I think part of it, and part of it, like, be honest, is one of the things I've been talking more about in the last year is mental wellness of our players. And look, some guys, are smoking pot just in the same way a guy would take a drink. And it's like, whatever, I'm smoking pot, I'm just using it to come down a little bit, or I just want to relax. No big deal, no issue. And I think it's the reason why it has been legalized in a lot of states. And from that standpoint, if that were the only issue, maybe we're behind the times in our program. On the other hand, there's also guys in the league who are smoking a lot of pot. And then the question is, why are you smoking a lot of pot? And that's where mental wellness comes in. Because I've also talked directly to players who say, I'm smoking a lot of pot because I have a lot of anxiety, and I'm struggling. And if that's the reason they're smoking a lot of pot, and by the way, alcohol is perfectly legal, and obviously we don't have a ban against alcohol, we don't test against alcohol, but unless we have a reason to believe there's a problem, but we don't want guys to smoke a lot to drink a lot either. And I think if we hear that a guy is drinking a lot, whether it's the player association, the team, or the league, we're approaching that guy and saying, can we help you? I mean, first and foremost, we want guys to be, in great shape. By the way, smoking isn't great for your lungs. If you run up and down the court.
I'm not advocating for it.
No, but either I'm only saying it's not like I feel sometimes that it's uncool the league still tests for marijuana, and I think that that's not exactly where the state of the science on marijuana is. I think that clearly to the extent it has medicinal qualities, those are the things we should be looking at, where it's in terms of pain relief, of course, and that's something that's being studied, not just by us. The NFL recently announced they're studying that issue as well, and we should look at it. But I also, the last part of this, I think when we change our policy, we have to be very careful, because clearly we're going to be sending a message to a lot of young people. And at the end of the day, I think we all agree that whether or not marijuana is a legal substance, just like with alcohol, you still have to teach young people how to use a substance like that appropriately, and responsibly, and so it doesn't overwhelm your life. So it's a complicated issue.
Well, last thing on that real quick. Say a player does test positive for marijuana during the season, but and the league knows that that's an anxiety issue that he's dealing with or something. Does he get a pass over that, or he's still?
It's an interesting question. So in the first instance, if a player tests positive for marijuana in this league, it's completely confidential. The league office doesn't know, and the Players Association doesn't know, and the team doesn't know. This is something we've negotiated with the Players Association, that a counselor privately goes to that player and says, you have tested positive for marijuana, and in essence, let's talk. And at that point, it's really a question of finding out what's going on in that player's life, seeing if there's other issues, seeing if there's also other drugs, maybe legally, that they're using with marijuana, or is that player drinking as well? And then that player is monitored. So in essence, the first time you're tested, it's really, there's no discipline associated with it. It's just like what's going on in your life, which is just the way I think it should be.
But if they're tested?
If the third time, if the second time, it's just more mandatory counseling in the program, still confidential. Third time, you can get a suspension.
Got you. Okay.
And by the way, very few players get to the third time.
It's very often.
Because I mean, face it, if you get to the third time, you know what's at risk. You know you're potentially going to suspend it, and that means that you've then made a decision that you really can't stop using it over a short period of time.
So, Adam, when you look at how free agency has taken over majority of the regular season, and in some instances the playoffs, where it overshadows the playoffs sometimes when you're talking about what Kevin Durant's going to do, what Kawhi Leonard's going to do, Kyrie Irving, the list goes on and on. Do you see that as a problem? Because for us, like as media, as I'm reporting things like that, obviously it's traffic, everybody's talking about it, but I always wanted to know from a league standpoint, is that good for the actual product that's going on the court at that moment?
I just want to challenge your question a little bit. I'm not convinced it overshadows the play on the floor. I mean, I'd say even from our own data, I mean, we run NBA.com, team websites, a hugely trafficked app. Highlights in games far exceed the interest there is in trade talk. So at least to this point, I don't see it overshadowing the game, and I'm not prepared to say it's bad that people are talking about our league when the games aren't on.
Okay.
Now, I get it that to a certain extent when there's false rumors out there, players, teams are put in a position where rather than talking about the play on the court, they're defending something that somebody's saying that they said you're interested in not staying or whatever else. That's a problem, but I also have to be realistic. I mean, I think on one hand, we're the huge beneficiary of people like yourself and enormous media interest in the league. And what comes with enormous media interest is a lot of the chatter and scuttlebutt about what's going on in the league. But to me, I mean, I'm not out. I don't necessarily sit there saying, oh, isn't that great? But on the other hand, I'm also a realist, and I don't think there's anything we're going to do to stop it. And I think that to the extent, we have rules against public trade demands and things like that, hopefully to damper down certain discussions and other rules about where teams should be jumping into those conversations. But other than that, we have a free media in the United States, and you guys are going to do what you're going to do. I think at the end of the day, the competition on the floor is what runs this business.
Okay, well, Adam, lastly, real quick, I got to ask you, expansion, I covered the Blazers, Pacific Northwest. Seattle was always that team that people feel like, they want to see a team back in Seattle. Is that possible?
It's definitely possible. What I've told everyone who's asked, it's not on the agenda at the moment in terms of expansion. Seattle, though, I was at the league for several years while we had a team in Seattle. I love going to Seattle. By the way, we still have a WNBA team in Seattle. It's a wonderful place to be, and I'm sure at some point we will return to discussing expansion, and no doubt Seattle will be on that list.
All right. Well, I've never had, you're the first guest, Adam, who actually came bearing gifts, man.
Right.
Yeah, this is the 2019 NBA Finals, man. Golden State and Toronto coming up. Thank you, Adam, for that. Hey. Most importantly, thank you for your time, man. I know you're a busy man.
No.
Thank you for posting up
Thank you.
with us.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Mike.